Every day, I wake up and get on Twitter. Not one of my healthier habits, but it's 2020. What are you going to do? But between the frankly incredible glut of nudes, personal posts about troubling times, and the irreverent jokes is the call to vote. I see clips of a late-night talk show host describing a litany of systemic problems that long predate this administration, showing the real-life devastation they cause and outlining the processes that have led us to this point. The only answer he's able to give us is to vote. I walk around to protest against the senseless killings of black people by the police, an issue that stems from decades of laws passed with the consent of Republicans and Democrats alike, permeating cities regardless of which party runs them. And people carry signs and wear hats and masks with one word: vote. I'm clearly not doing much to hide my skepticism of voting here. Why do I have this gut eye-roll reaction to these calls to vote? And it's not that I don't believe in voting. I think voting is one action in a diversity of tactics we need to pursue to see political change. But so many people see it as the be-all, end-all of anyone's political action, and see some kind of irony or hypocrisy in activists who participate in protests and organize in their communities, but don't vote. I don't want to talk anyone who is voting out of it, or convince anyone to change their vote one way or the other. The thing I want to push back on and investigate is the reaction to people who don't vote, and hopefully forward a narrative that goes deeper than the popular idea that people who don't vote are simply ignorant or dumb or privileged. Privilege, I think, is the important one here, because it represents a kind of evolution in this sort of voter shaming. In my late teens and even in college, I was really one of the only politically engaged people I knew. Like, I was a hardcore lib. And I remember feeling this sense of superiority over my classmates who, for the most part, openly identified as apolitical. And I felt like, oh, these people, they're so ignorant. Don't they realize how important this is? And that was basically the feeling toward non-voters for a while. That these people were checked out, and if they really understood things, they would care more. And so there was this exasperated condescension toward them. But in more recent years, this idea has been replaced a little. I think as early as 2016, once Hillary had definitively seized the Democratic nomination, I remember in online social justice type spaces, this argument was really seeded that doing anything other than voting for Hillary was a privileged position to take. The argument basically went that defeating Donald Trump was so urgent that anyone who would be directly affected or anyone who actually cared about those people would vote for Clinton, and therefore to do anything else was indicative of privilege. If you've been paying attention to social media or pundits this time around, this probably sounds really familiar. And that argument seems to have only become more entrenched since then, which is interesting to me because although I think a lot of the people repeating this argument really do believe it, and I know this because in 2016 I was one of them, it's also being really cynically used to weirdly say, hey, shut up about any actual issues and vote for the shitty centrist who wrote the crime bill and oversaw the awful mistreatment of one of the most high-profile sexual assault allegations of the 20th century. That's the woke thing to do. This, to me, seems to be part of a larger pattern of centrist Democrats attempting to use a kind of empty, symbolic identity politics in order to silence people looking for actual systemic change. The Kennedy-Markey election is a good recent example of this, along with countless others. Again, this doesn't mean reasonable people can't argue in good faith that Biden really is a moral choice, but the framing of him as the only choice is where I kind of bristle. And to bring this back to non-voters and the apolitical among us, the latest incarnation of this argument is one I started seeing on Twitter in late September that kind of set me to want to make this video, and that's the idea that being apolitical is privileged. And this is one of those really great examples of taking an argument to its natural conclusion and seeing if it breaks down. And this really does, because when you look at who participates in politics versus who doesn't, it basically is the opposite of what this implies. It's a well-known fact that in the United States, voter turnout isn't particularly high compared to the proportion of people of voting age. And these people are overwhelmingly young, lower income, Black or Hispanic, and people with the largest investment in politics are the ones who benefit the most. And while we can chalk a lot of that up to disenfranchisement, many forms of disenfranchisement can be overcome if a person really wants to. Lack of motivation, being apolitical, or feeling like voting won't matter can do just as much to ensure someone doesn't vote. But okay, while these non-voting populations should definitely be of concern to anyone who cares about voting, these are clearly not the apolitical people being referred to. Setting aside Wall Street types, large corporations, and the very wealthy, who I think we can all agree are very politically engaged, which privileged people are being invoked here? And if I put on my lib hat, this is my libertarian hat, but, I'm assuming they're thinking of the same person they think of when they imagine an average Joe Rogan fan. White guy, 30s, 40s, maybe 20s, straight, not exactly well off, maybe some reactionary opinions, but solidly thinks of himself as not political. Mostly, I think the implication is since this person is not obviously or directly marginalized for their gender, sexuality, or race, they don't realize the importance of politics, or worse, they benefit from the status quo. And I think there is some truth to that first one. Lots of marginalized people get into politics due to their own experience with being marginalized. But I feel like that latter point is in there too, and that's where I feel the need to push back on that narrative a little. Because these people aren't benefiting from the status quo. I've grown up around all sorts of people who fit that basic profile, and they're not doing so well. They're working shitty, menial jobs. The older versions of them might have some kind of stability from living through a good housing market and managing to not get completely screwed by one of these recessions, but by and large, people who are legitimately benefiting from the status quo are politically active, because they're aware of the link between their life as it is and the present political reality. For all the ways Democrats are sincerely better than Republicans on things like LGBT rights, corporate girl power, and black capitalism, for many people, things don't change regardless of who's in power, and not because they're doing well. And while I understand the frustration that it does make a difference for a lot of people, and we ought to vote on the basis of that alone, I also think shaming people for their disengagement does a lot more to make them resent you than swing them to your side. I imagine this year will just be a more extreme version of normal trends. People who are already invested in one mainstream candidate or the other will see every part of this election as further justification of that choice, and this election is one of the most important in their lifetime, either to prevent Antifa Joe Biden from destroying the country or whatever, or to get the existential threat of Donald Trump out of the White House for good. And for everyone not already invested in the narrative that Biden will be a significant improvement, well, they see this.
You know, you picked the wrong guy, the wrong night at the wrong time.
Listen, you agreed with
Here's
Bernie
the deal.
Sanders to the
The
manifesto.
whole idea,
Let him.
there is no manifesto, number
Please
one.
let him speak, Mr.
Number
President.
two.
He just lost the left.
Not to mention, if someone isn't motivated to vote, the risk of disease probably won't be extremely motivating either. I think a lot of the anger being directed at apolitical people comes from a place of powerlessness. Anyone even vaguely left of center knows how futile voting can be, but in that futility we can always blame the people who didn't participate. If only they'd cared enough, things wouldn't be this way. But that's not true. Twice in my lifetime, a political candidate has won the popular vote and lost the election. A lot of people are apolitical because they don't have any hope that being involved would make a difference. And given how things are going, I can't say I blame them. For a lot of people telling everyone to vote, the value of the vote seems more symbolic than effective. And the more hopeless and alienated among us don't feel that symbolic value of participation. And this doesn't even get at how straightforward voting seems until you're actually looking at a ballot, and the only people you know are the president and maybe a couple of Congress people. I filled out my absentee ballot really recently, and I had to look up basically every person on it. And I'm one of the more political people I know. And I can only be so hard on myself for not being more involved in local politics because when I went to do some basic research to figure out who I wanted to vote for, I wasn't even able to find a picture of most of the candidates, let alone a platform of any kind. Which sucks because local politics in a lot of ways make a larger difference in most of our lives than the presidential election we all direct our attention toward. People will talk about voting down ballot, but if a relatively internet-savvy 25-year-old can't get the details, what hope is there for less online people? Let alone people who don't have access to the internet at all. Why isn't there some kind of official registry where we can all see descriptions of the candidates and their positions? People who really believe in voting are some of the most earnest people still around, and I don't want to crush that spirit at all. But that energy that goes toward getting angry at people who don't vote would be better directed toward pressuring representatives to make voting easier for everyone, and to bringing attention to all kinds of voter disenfranchisement, from voter ID laws to direct voter intimidation. I would also recommend getting involved with an organization with others who want to see the same changes as you, and can often provide endorsements all the way down the ticket, since your vote means a lot more in coordination with others. Voting doesn't have to be the beginning and end of your political activity. Like I said, you can join an organization, pressure representatives on specific policy goals, work to get politicians who will fight for you at the local level, or get involved in mutual aid in your community. I really do think if more people believe things could get better, they'd be more invested in politics, but that's not the world we live in. Yet. Hey, thanks for watching. It was nice making a short video after the Hamilton one ended up being so long, and this was by far the fastest turnaround time I've ever had making a video. And I had a lot of fun making it. So, why was I dressed as a zombie? Let's see. Well, there you have it. I've got a few video ideas I'm still figuring out right now, but Monster Prom, one of my favorite games, just came out with a sequel recently, so if anyone is interested, I might stream that a bit in November. Info for that will be mostly on Twitter. Happy Halloween, everyone, and remember, no matter who wins this election, we have a lot of work to do.